October 22, 1979, New York City. A man with a fake name, Mr. Gregory, is being wheeled through a secret entrance at New York Presbyterian Hospital. He looks like a ghost. He's dying of cancer. Outside, the world is normal. People are buying disco records, the Yankees are playing ball, but inside this room, a single IV drip is about to do more damage to the United States than a Soviet nuclear warhead. This isn't just a medical emergency. It's the spark that's about to burn down 50 years of Middle Eastern peace and turn a billionaire's playground into a great Satan. The CIA warned it would happen. The State Department begged for it not to happen, but Jimmy Carter did it anyway. And while the doctors were scrubbing in, the students in Tehran were already sharpening their knives. Before we dive into the wreckage of this $2 trillion mistake, I need to know, which corner of the world are you watching this from? Drop your flag or your city in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how far this story has traveled across the map we're about to redraw. To understand how we got to the brink of World War III in 2026, you have to realize that in the 1970s, Iran wasn't the enemy. They were the cool older brother of the Middle East. Under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, Iran was a land of miniskirts, jazz clubs, and enough American fighter jets to make a Texan blush. Washington called Iran one of the twin pillars of their Middle East strategy. We gave them the tech, they gave us the oil, and everyone was happy, except, the millions of Iranians living under a secret police force called Savak that made the FBI look like a troop of Cub Scouts. The Shah was our guy. He was Western, he was wealthy, and he was the only thing keeping the Soviets from the Persian Gulf. But while the Shah was throwing the most expensive party in human history to celebrate 2,500 years of the Persian Empire, a bearded man in a small apartment in France was recording cassette tapes that would change everything. And as the Shah looked out over his empire, he felt a sharp pain in his side, a pain he decided to keep a secret from the American government, a secret that was about to blow a hole through the White House. Stick with this story, because by the end, we'll reveal one specific declassified document from the National Security Archive that proves the U.S. knew exactly how the hostage crisis would end before the first embassy gate was even climbed. A piece of paper that could have prevented 50 years of war, but was ignored for the sake of decency. By 1978, the party was over. The Shah's secret police had been a bit too enthusiastic, and the Iranian people were done. The cassette tapes from that man in France, Ayatollah Khomeini, had gone viral before the internet existed. The Shah fled Iran with a box of Iranian soil and a heavy heart, wandering from Egypt to Mexico like the world's most depressed billionaire. Enter Jimmy Carter, the human rights president. Carter was in a bind. If he let the Shah into the U.S., he looked like he supported a dictator. If he didn't, he looked like a traitor to a loyal ally. But then the Mexican doctors dropped the bombshell. The Shah had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was dying. David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger started leaning on Carter. It's a humanitarian issue, they said. We can't let an old friend die in a Mexican hospital. Carter famously asked his advisors, "What are you guys going to advise me to do when they break into our embassy and take our people hostage?" He literally predicted the future. Yet on October 22nd, he caved. The Shah landed in New York City. To the revolutionaries in Tehran, this wasn't cancer treatment. It was a coup in progress. They thought the U.S. was going to put the Shah back on the throne, just like they did in 1953, and they weren't going to wait for the surgery to finish before they took their revenge. On November 4, 1979, the Muslim student followers of the Imam's line climbed the fence of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They expected a skirmish. They got a 444-day international nightmare. This wasn't just a diplomatic tiff. This was the birth of the Great Satan narrative. Suddenly, the twin pillar was gone. In its place was the Islamic Republic, led by Khomeini, who realized that nothing unites a fractured country like a common enemy. The U.S. tried a rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw. It ended with crashed helicopters in the desert and a humiliated Pentagon. The trauma of those 444 days rewired the American psyche. It's why we supported Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. Ironic, I know. Why we have sanctions that make a grocery trip in Tehran a month's salary, and why the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, became the most feared shadow army in the world. But the real tragedy isn't just the 52 hostages. It's that while the U.S. was focused on the Shah's gallbladder, they missed the fact that a much more dangerous weapon was being developed right under their noses, and it wasn't the bomb.
The weapon the U.S. missed wasn't a nuke, it was asymmetric warfare. While Washington was playing checkers with conventional aircraft carriers, the new Iranian supreme leader was playing 4D chess with the IRGC. Think of the IRGC as a combination of the Marines, the CIA, and a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, all wrapped in a religious crusade. They realized they couldn't outgun the U.S. Navy, so they did something much smarter. They started a franchise model. Ever heard of Hezbollah? That was Iran's first startup. In the early 1980s, while the U.S. was still reeling from the hostage crisis, Iran sent advisors to Lebanon. Suddenly, suicide bombings, a tactic largely unknown at the time, became a terrifying reality. In 1983, a truck driven by an Iranian-backed militant leveled the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut. 241 American servicemen died in their sleep. This was the pivot. The Great Satan was no longer just a slogan, it was a target. But the irony? The U.S. was so desperate to get their other hostages out of Lebanon that they started a secret deal to sell weapons to, wait for it, Iran. Yes, the Iran-Contra scandal. We were literally arming the people who were chanting for our downfall in order to fund a war in South America. It's the kind of plot twist that would get a Hollywood writer fired for being too unrealistic. But just as this bizarre secret romance was blooming, a U.S. Navy cruiser in the Persian Gulf made a mistake so catastrophic it would ensure Iran and America could never, ever be friends again. July 3, 1988. The USS Vincennes is patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. Tension is high. They pick up a blip on the radar. They think it's an Iranian F-14 Tomcat. They fire. They were wrong. It was Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian Airbus A300 with 290 people on board, including 66 children. Everyone died. The U.S. called it a tragic accident. Iran called it a deliberate massacre. To this day, every Iranian schoolchild learns about Flight 655. To them, it's proof that America doesn't just hate their government, they hate their people. This single event solidified the hardliners' power for decades. Any talk of diplomacy became political suicide in Tehran. By the 1990s, the physical war had cooled down, but a new generation of Iranian scientists was about to start a project in a basement that would eventually bring the world to the brink of total annihilation. Enter the word that keeps Pentagon generals awake at night: centrifuges. Iran started building a nuclear infrastructure. They claimed it was for peaceful energy, which is like saying you're buying a chainsaw just to trim the hedges when you live in a desert. The West panicked. This wasn't just about a bomb, it was about the Shia crescent, stretching from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut, having the ultimate leverage. But instead of dropping bombs, the US and Israel dropped code. If you're enjoying this deep dive into how one doctor's referral flipped the entire Middle East upside down, hit subscribe. It's free, it costs you nothing, and it keeps me from having to get a real job reviewing AI cat videos. Now back to the story. It was called Stuxnet, a computer worm so sophisticated it didn't just steal data, it physically destroyed hardware. It was designed to make Iran's nuclear centrifuges at Natanz spin until they literally exploded, all while the monitoring screens told the Iranian technicians that everything was perfectly normal. It was the first time in human history a digital attack caused physical destruction on a national scale. It was brilliant, it was effective, and it was a massive check in the game. But as every chess player knows, when you put someone in check, they don't just give up, they move their queen. After the US invaded Iraq in 2003, they inadvertently did Iran the biggest favor in history. They removed Iran's biggest enemy, Saddam Hussein. Suddenly, Iraq became a playground for the IRGC. This is where we meet Qasem Soleimani, the Shadow Commander. This man was the James Bond of the Middle East if James Bond worked for a revolutionary theocracy. He was everywhere. He was the one coordinating the militias, the IEDs, and the political coups. By 2015, Iran effectively controlled 4 capitals: Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and Sana'a. The U.S. was desperate to stop the expansion. They tried a deal. The 2015 JCPA, the so-called Iran deal. It was supposed to be the grand bargain, but in Washington, a new storm was brewing that would rip that paper to shreds. When the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal in 2018, it wasn't just a policy shift, it was a grenade tossed into a room full of gasoline. The maximum pressure campaign was born. The goal? Bankrupt the Islamic Republic until they had no choice but to come crawling back to the table. But here's the thing about maximum pressure. It only works if the other guy doesn't have a backup plan. And Iran has been practicing for a resistance economy since the days of the Walkman. While the Iranian rial was hitting record lows and people were struggling to buy medicine, the IRGC wasn't cutting its budget. They were doubling down on their shadow investments. While the world was arguing over enrichment levels, Iran was perfecting something much cheaper and much deadlier: the Shahed drone. These suicide drones are essentially flying lawnmowers packed with explosives. They're cheap, they're loud, and they are currently the most exported Iranian product besides oil. From the deserts of Yemen to the plains of Ukraine, the Shah's revenge is now being felt globally. And this is where the 1979 betrayal circles back to haunt the 2026 present. Because the West cut them off from the global market 40 years ago, Iran built their own parallel tech industry. They didn't need Silicon Valley, they just needed black market components and a lot of spite. But the true terrifying shift happened in January 2020, when a single explosion at Baghdad International Airport proved the shadow war was finally coming into the light. You remember where you were when the news broke. A U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone fires a Hellfire missile at a convoy. Qasem Soleimani, the man who had been the architect of Iranian influence for 20 years, was gone. Washington cheered, Tehran wept. But the real consequence wasn't the death of one man. It was the death of the last shred of old guard diplomacy. Since that strike, the IRGC has shifted from a shadow organization to the literal face of the Iranian state. In 2026, they aren't just the guardians. They're the CEOs, the ministers, and the ones holding the nuclear keys. Which brings us to the present. The B-52 Stratofortress, an 8-engine monster that can carry 70,000 pounds of weapons. When you see these flying over the Persian Gulf today, it's not a routine exercise. It's a "please don't make us do this" signal from the Pentagon. Because right now the math is looking grim. Iran has reached 60% uranium enrichment. For those who didn't major in nuclear physics, 90% is weapons grade. Going from 60 to 90 is like a sprinter finishing the last 5 meters of a race. Iran is essentially a threshold state, a country that doesn't have a bomb yet but could build one before a diplomat could finish a cup of coffee. So, was it worth it? Did the decision to save one dying man in 1979 justify 50 years of a nuclear-armed standoff? To answer that, we have to look at the one document the CIA tried to bury for 4 decades. Here is what was promised. In a declassified memo from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, sent 3 days before the Shah was admitted to the hospital, Chargé d'Affaires Bruce Langan explicitly told Washington the secular government here will fall, and the radicals will take the embassy if the Shah enters the U.S. It's a mathematical certainty. But here's the kicker that most documentaries miss. In that same week, the Iranian provisional government, the moderates who actually wanted to keep a relationship with America, offered a secret deal. They told Carter, "Keep the Shah in Mexico and we will protect your embassy from the radicals." The U.S. didn't just miscalculate. They had a golden ticket to bypass the revolution. They had a direct line to the people who could have kept the Great Satan posters from ever being printed. But Jimmy Carter, pressured by Chase Bank and Henry Kissinger, chose the humanitarian gesture for a former dictator over the survival of American influence in the East. One hospital visit, one IV drip, one dying king. We like to think of history as a series of grand, inevitable movements, but often it's just a series of bad calls made by tired people in the Oval Office. We traded a 50-year alliance for a 2-week hospital stay. And today, as the B-52s circle the Gulf and the centrifuges hum in the dark, we are still paying the interest on that medical bill. Was Carter a hero for his compassion or the architect of a $2 trillion disaster? Drop your answer in the comments. Stay curious.